for coming from behind is creating a glare. I can live with that. I can go ahead with that if you wish.
Okay.
If you need it, see, if you need it, you must keep it. Because I think it may be that there's not enough light in the room and you all need it for yourselves.
We start.
Okay, yes, we can start. It is live now. Yes.
All right.
Good morning, sir. And good morning, everyone. Sorry that we are, I think, about 20 minutes behind schedule. We have to work with certain things at the last moment. So today is the second day, and this is the second invited talk. And today we have Professor Rajesh Sachdeva, who is the former retired director of the Central Institute of Indian Languages. And I think he's not new to many of us. Since we are behind schedule, I'll quickly ask Sir to take his time. And it's, I think, 9:20 now.
Yeah.
So,
okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Till 10 o'clock. Yeah, till 10 o'clock.
Yeah. Now, I think I was also the head of the Department of Linguistics, which we set up in Nehu first in Kohima. And then we moved into Shillong later. And because of efforts of Professor War. So I begin this talk by paying homage to my colleagues like Professor War, who's no more, but whose spirit was, ever present in the department that we set up. My students and teachers like Vijay, who's no more, Curiously, who's no more, who are teaching in other departments, including in Kerala, Curiously was teaching, and who exposed me to Panar as a language in his dissertation. So I am recollecting all the faces, people who have given their lives to the work of languages in the Northeast. So I pay homage to all those people, and my work in the Northeast, whatever I can sort of tell you about, I'll stick to that and do it. So that is my recollection, is like a part of my prayer and gathering, and I hope I have the strength to guide you in with whatever little things that I have to say. Right in the beginning, I would like to say that language planning in the context of endangered languages is the oldest discourse in the world, in some sense, on language. The entire science of language or linguistics developed in that context. You see, it was in India that the whole idea was felt that all the spoken varieties will in time to come wither away and change and go away. So there was a need for documenting, describing the language of their times. So the entire science of linguistics, as we know it, from Sanskrit tradition, developed in that context of safeguarding the speech, safeguarding the Vedas, safeguarding the language of that time. Because when Panini took to the quest of safeguarding the things, there was a tradition of people who worked on that. And as a result of that, the entire discipline of linguistics developed in that. So we must pay homage to the people who gave us linguistics as a science. And it all began here in this country, where there was this concern for safeguarding the spoken things. Vedas were seen, and out of the 6 Vedangas or branches of knowledge, 4 were related directly to language, right? There was Nirukta for etymology and dictionary making and meaning, making sense of the meaning. There was Shiksha. We call it today education, but Shiksha was entirely the study of phonetics, production of speech, right? And every word was, the whole study of Shiksha was a Vedanga, right? And of course, Vyakaran, the crown of all the Vedangas, where the great work of Panini and Ashtadhyayi all step into it. And the entire idea of seeing the language, the well-forwardness of language, in seeing the different classes of things, and a purely formal account of it. And along with that, there was the Chandas, or the study of prosody, because the entire language was coming at that time in both spoken form and in sung in verses. So they wanted to keep the tunes of the original thing. So the study of prosody was very important, and Chandas was that. So this whole idea of studying phonetics, grammar making, dictionary making, prosody, everything went together. And language was seen as an intrinsic component of all culture. In some sense, the word culture was seen as a derivative of language. That's the interesting part of the conception of language. And then the most important treatises on language grew in this country, on the philosophy of language and all that. Even as recently as last year, when Noam Chomsky was addressing us all on his talk on language and cognition, he began with a word of prayer for Bhartahari. He paid homage to the great man Bhartahari, who in his philosophical work, Ashtadhyay, Vakyapadiya, he talked about the relationship between language and cognition, right? So language was seen as something that was connected to culture, to cognition, and all, entire thing, and even consciousness. So this idea that, a word sort of pervades and it defines mankind was there. So with that kind of a thing, then that is the reason it was so valuable, the quest for safeguarding language, that they did all the hard work of putting together their entire tools and developed entire science. So linguistics was as an applied discipline, right from its beginning. It has all the theoretical dimensions, of course, but its beginning, it was its interest. So I'm saying that language planning as a field is the oldest thing, and the birth of linguistics owes itself to this concern, which is very applied in some sense to safeguard, the heritage of the country, the varieties of languages and the things. And it began with Sanskrit, and then the tradition spread into Prakrit, and many of the other Indian languages drew from those models. Many of them, unfortunately, just stuck to the model, did not evolve the model to sort of suit the needs, the forms of their own languages. They in a way began to import and created a problem, because Sanskrit was not the language of later times when the languages were changing. So the models had to be revised in keeping with the forms of speech, and the description of speech was primary. But we suffered from those, and we stuck to certain models of thinking and did not evolve some of these things, though lots of things are. So A is that. Now, I also want to pay homage to two great friends of mine who passed away, in the last few years, of course. Last year, my friend, language planning in India man, Dr. Hansraj Dua, who wrote that classic book on language planning in India, he passed away. And his way of looking at language planning was that, you see, language planning can be seen as something to address problems of language. And he talked about 5 sets of problems that language planning can hope to address. One was talking about language as a symbol. When we talk about state languages, official languages, and all those things, the symbolic value of a language, that is something we need to address and talk about. The second thing is about language materials. Those, much of it is dealt in this thing. Then language structure, and language use, and language user. So putting the speaker in the middle, this user, all forms of language use around him, the materials drawn on that, and the kind of issues of structure that were involved, and the symbolic value of language. Issues related to this would be of concern to language planners, he said, and he gives elaborate examples of this in his work. And Professor Robert L. Cooper, whose work I really enjoyed in language planning and social change, and one I have always borrowed his last paragraph, that line that to plan language is to plan society. He has that, he ends his discourse there, and he tells us that language planning is seldom a one-shot affair. But his idea that the engaging with language is involving the whole of society, so in some sense, that is a very important dimension of it. But he told us something very interesting too. He said, language planning refers to deliberate efforts to influence the behavior of others with respect to the acquisition, structure, or functional allocation of their language codes, you see. So he talked about, this deliberate efforts to influence the behavior of people. And he accordingly talked about planning for the status of a language, the corpus of the materials of the language, and acquisition planning. How do we put it into schools and institutions, spread and all that? So how do we make people acquire those languages? So efforts related to acquisition were there. But it was very important that he said something else, which is something that we need to think about on this front. He told us that on the motivation for language planning, Cooper said that language planning is typically carried out for attainment of non-linguistic ends. You do language planning not for the sake of only language. You do it for societal purposes. It could be consumer protection, scientific exchange, national integration, political control, economic development, creation of new elites, or the maintenance of old ones, and the pacification of minority groups, and mass mobilization of political movements and stuff like that. So this whole idea that language could be an emotive thing and you do it. So people who are talking about languages and are they, so there are non-linguistic factors, no societal concerns and other issues which people are hoping that when we take stand on language, we will be as though resolving issues that are there in the society. So therefore, we find the meeting of this two sets of discourses, people who want to focus on language and people who want to focus on society. I know typically that is how we used to say, even in sociolinguistics, that sociolinguistics is the study of language and the nature of language in relation to the society. And sociology of language was about the study of society, where behavior of language will tell us something about the society, and typical issues like language maintenance, language loyalty, language loss, and language planning, perhaps in that area. So the idea of trying to understand the nature of language and trying to understand the nature of society. So those were the things. And we as linguists, we developed a certain methodology to address those issues. Now, what do we have to say about the entire Northeast? You see, to me, the very idea of Northeast, as I say, is a planner's construct, right? The word Northeast brings together regions of across very diverse communities. There are people, so people put even now Sikkim into that fold of this thing. So the 7 states, the Assam in the center, and the Arunachal, Nagaland, Mizoram, Tripura, all Meghalaya, every one of us comes together in that whole rubric called Northeast. And half of India's 121 languages come in from this place, right? Half of India's languages. And although the population of Tibeto-Burman people, which contribute the largest number of languages in this country, listed in the census, they all come from this area. The percentage of population is seen as only 1% of the entire country's population belongs to the Tibeto-Burman group. So imagine 1% of the overpopulation of the country, and yet half the languages belong to that. So it speaks about extremely diverse kind of a language situation in Northeast. And we have to then ask ourselves, what does it mean to be a separate language? And then you combine it with the idea of tribes, and suddenly you're getting into other units and other units of meaning making, and a set of planning has gone to it. So the next point I'm trying to make is the information that we have about Northeast is a planned kind of a thing. See, which are to be counted as languages and which are to be listed as direct mother tongues, that decision gets taken by the language division, and some amount of planning happens right there. So when you say there's a language like Khasi, under which is listed Lingam and War and Panar, you have already decided that these are one language. And so even if linguists come and now try and make a stake that these are separate, the language division will have a tussle with them because they have classified them under one for their own reasons. And so we as linguists have to ask ourselves, we can get in touch with them. Are we here to declare forms of speech as separate just because we think our inquiry, or is it that the category has been given to us by planners and put on? Similarly, the notion of tribe, right? Similar notion of tribe. The notion of tribe, as we have it, all these languages in the Kukichin area, the Simte, Gante, Vaipe, they all seem to be speaking very much the same language for linguist purposes. You ask them what else, the Tui, 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 everybody will end up saying the same words and steps, and yet they are counted as separate tribes. And from that linguist, the whole, so every inquiry into the labels that are given to us in the names of tribes and the names that are given of languages, the mother tongues that are listed, everything, the data that we have, some amount of planning is given. And there is this very tricky decision and a sad decision in some sense that now all the mother tongues which are below 10,000 and ones which would be probably the more endangered ones, they don't even get listed in the census for us. You have to get those names through the census, through some other authorities, because the decision not to give the names of mother tongues that are below 10,000 was also taken and some by planners in this country, and they did that. So we are in some sense victims of planning already. We don't have knowledge of the names of those which are less than 10,000, and the names are clubbed together under languages as per their own decision, and some are belonging. So there are tribes which are shown as separate tribes, and yet they speak the same language. So everything demands that we have, and so that is why right in the beginning, while making out a case for studying language planning, I'm making out that we must do case-by-case studies of communities. Any work that wants to pick up an issue must focus on that specific case in a specific context, in a specific state, and look into the decisions that are in place already, and then bring out the whole idea of what is being done there and what is happening there, what could possibly be done there. So the idea of case-by-case studies are important. Now, what kind of issues will come up into that? We will talk about. For example, the issue of script and orthography and all that. And that's the first step when you have spoken languages that have not yet got graphization. You would be wanting to pick up the script. Now, I'll start with a small story just to make the narrative a little less thing and more focused on what my experience was. We were in Arunachal Pradesh and we had done this entire what is called community consultation meeting. The chief minister had come down, the education minister had come down, all the 40 communities were engaged with us. And for 3 days, we were all having discussions, talking, and each community was telling us the situation that they had in their own language. And we were all doing it. But we knew that there was a very weak support for languages, mother tongues in Arunachal schools. And we were pleading for a case of strengthening those languages and doing it with them. And the case that was being made out in Arunachal Pradesh by the governments there was of trying to keep connectedness with India. So they wanted Hindi and English to be strengthened institutionally. They were not too strongly inclined towards putting mother tongues in things. And the communities themselves were a bit ambivalent on that. So after that meeting, all those things, all taking, putting those things together, recording their entire discourses and all that, which can be made available to anybody who wants to listen to what people said. We were visiting schools, and I'll go to the Happy School, which I went to. We were run in Daporijo region. There were these very small children of class 2 and 1 together. So we went into the school and there were these Tagin children and Galo children and Apatani children and a few others and all that all together. And they were all smiling and happy and all that. So we asked them, can you write your mother tongue? So what do you say for this? Something. No, something. Oh, can you write it for me? You know what the child tells us? Hindi se likhega ke English se likhega? She asked me. Because she knew her ABCD and she knew her Kakaga, the child, through institutional support. And sure enough, for the next 45 minutes, we video recorded all the children. One by one, they were coming up and writing body part, this part, in both the scripts. And with some amount of ease, which meant that they had acquired the scripts as tools. And they were in a position to write their languages if the institution was willing to support and give them that opportunity. They were all ready to write it down. And they wrote us. So there's a huge amount of things that got done. There was nothing called they were actually writing correctly or incorrectly and all that, because there was all kinds of, even the teacher, I asked him to write. The teacher, for food, he said, food. The teacher. He could not distinguish a fur from a purr. And because in his language, it was just, he didn't have that fur in thing. And so the teachers themselves were having, but the children were writing with some amount of delight and all that. So the idea when you say that, when you teach scripts, what are the values of this? So this, the issues of engaging children and letting out, it doesn't matter whether you've begun with the Roman script or a Devanagari script or some other script that is being there. But if children acquire the thing, they're in a position to write more than this thing. Now we know that all of us are using Roman script across. I mean, I often write my Hindi and my Punjabi and my Urdu, or even my Kannada at times with Roman script when we are communicating in this thing, and I'm not changing the lipi into that. So scripts are like that, right? So it can be changed. Yet the decision to put the languages in school, this calls for thinking from below and with the people involved. They have to have a support for an ecology of multilingualism. Now, what about the contrasting case of Nagaland, where I spent 8 years and I set up the Department of Linguistics? Even yesterday, I was talking to the director of school education, is a Tamilian and IS officer has taken over in Kohima. And he told me the plan is, the thing is the same. Those 17, 18 languages that they had recognized in 1961, 63, when they set up the state, it was the first state in the Northeast to be set up on ethnic grounds, not on linguistic, right? Nagas were, the linguistic differences between them were all set aside, and an ethnic state was being put up after much resistance of the movements for sovereignty and all those things that we have seen. And those 18 languages have come up. Pochuri came about 10, 12 years back. All those languages are still being taught in schools, right? They have added cultural component to it, and they made Naga heritage and all that. And there, because of what they said, saving the costs of things, they produce materials first in English only for classroom consumption. And then they give a directive to the teachers in different territories. You are free to translate and explain the things in your mother tongue in schools, right? So if you're in Mokokchung, you can go ahead and do it in Ao. If you're in Zone Boto, you can be free to use your Sema. And if you're in Kohima, you are free. But that kind of a license is given to the teacher. And yet, there comes in Kohima and Nagaland, the Nagamese case, which is suddenly seen as problematized, because there's a whole issue. It invites all kinds of questions and issues about identity and all that. It's a language that people across tribes understand. As the Sanctum officer said, it's like my second mother tongue, for them. And yet planners are very wary of putting Nagamese in schools. Some of them call it a bastard language, a non-Naga language, and all kinds of attitudinal issues are brought into the fold in Nagaland. And they take away your freedom by imposing that. So the whole elite group sort of tells you that you are not supposed to be using Nagamese in schools and all that. And yet it doesn't mean that in practice it doesn't happen. So between the directive of people, between the policy decisions of the state, and between the actual use of language, there are empirical issues to be found out. What happens in classrooms? How do people do that? And I have several anecdotes and all that, but today I wouldn't want to say that. Right in bringing these issues to your, I'm now trying to say that in a multilingual society, a language planner who's trying to take issues, for example, in a critical domain of language education, where the new education policy or the national education policy of today is also directing us to use the mother tongues and strengthen multilingualism in schools, we need to find a new pedagogy. We need to be supportive of new ecology. So the question that I'm asking, which all of us can take a stand on and work on and think about, is, are monolingual medium schools, say the idea of English medium schools, is it valid in a multilingual country? Or shall we say that a school must be de facto multilingual always, because the children belong to different languages, and the policy directs us to draw on the resources of the children and build on the resources of the children. So the whole idea that one language will become the sole medium and become that, are we therefore going to allow the elitist stand of English medium become, even if the parents also want it? Must not we question that? Must not we think differently? So each of us has to take a stand, a viewpoint, and an informed view, and defend what we want to say into that. But to my mind, here's a great opportunity for linguists to come out of their linguistics classrooms to engage with languages, to take up issues from description and documentation to the issues of development, to the issues of language use in schools, to the issue of directing all your knowledge of multilingualism and all that, and evolve a new pedagogy and lend yourself towards correct. So what I expect is various forms of multilingualism to be to take forth. Already there are different forms of multilingualisms in society. Different contexts produce different forms, different language uses are there. Yet, when you want to bring in institutional support into the languages, the teaching of literacy, the choices of scripts, and the use of medium, the use of all of that is something which is an area where linguists can go. So linguists in some sense, and linguistics in that sense, will have to go downwards into the schools. It cannot remain confined to departments and descriptions and journals and articles. The study of language must be one in which you engage the society for your purposes. You must lend yourself and your thinking into that. And you don't have to become great, perfect linguist before you get into the thing. You must start engaging in the way you think about language on that front. So that is something that I want to talk about. Now look at what has happened in the Northeast regarding the state official languages. Nagaland has English, Meghalaya has English, Arunachal has gone from Hindi to English and Singlish now. And Mizoram is the de facto linguistics. So there is Mizo and English together there, right? Manipuri is like a state language, like in Maharashtra or this thing. So it is the major language of the majority and a bit of a lingua franca for the others as well. And and the name Manipuri has to the language, but the people call it Maitelon, right? Interesting. So the state is called Manipur, a geographical name. And this whole idea of naming the states is also kind of a planner's construct, right? The names like Arunachal and Meghalaya and Manipur are all Indo-Aryan names, right? And have been given to states in some sense to create a sense of belongingness to the mainstream and Indian stream, a feeling of Indianness in their names and all that. And I have not known too many people who have resisted that, right? It's not as if people are looking for alternative naming of things. So the absence of resentment, the absence of this thing is in itself indicative of that how, in some sense, cultural planning and language planning goes on in the minds of those who are there, and how we engage with our names is something. So the word Manipur, I mean, and for the language which is there for Meitei is something that, thing. Of course, we were just discussing the issue of orthography and script. The whole idea of the Meitei script, then the new script that has come into being, and the burning of the library, which had Bengali script books of Manipur and all that, a very violent movement has come into a very emotive issues around script have evolved. Somebody needs to document, think, go back and believe, put out the case, what happened in Manipur on the coming into being of this new script and the entire movement behind it. For posterity, we need it. For contemporary value, we need it. Because in the process, lots of people who were writing and literate in Manipuri through Bengali script are no longer able to write in the script that they're now bringing it down gradually. So what is the vision of those people? Who are those people? Who took the decisions and how it has come into it? What are the consequences of it? What were the antecedents to that? I remember going to Imphal and standing under a shop where the new landscape and the new nameplates had come up in the new script. And I asked them to read their name. They said, we can't read the script. They have put it up on the linguistic landscape because that is the right thing to do. They are meeting the requirements of the people of what are the thing to sort of save their skin. But they were not able to read it. Many of them who had put up those linguistic signs up there. So the consequence of those decisions that were taken and how overnight many people who were literate in their language were made to feel they are not. Those are things that so you need to pick up the case studies of what happened to Manipuri. Now Manipuri, Bodo are included for the first two Tibeto-Burman languages to be put into the 8th schedule, right? So Now, Bodo had a very violent sort of a movement preceding it and they were, just as Nagaland's bloody struggle is well documented and talked about, the Mizo struggle is also, something that we have seen about. The Bodo struggle was also very violent and all that. And then my own predecessor, my own director, Professor Patnaik, was sent by the Prime Minister to negotiate with the Bodos. And they talked about the choice of the script. And the choice of Devanagari was very interesting. Now, you may think that it's not yet a resolved problem. There are other people who may want Roman and there are cases and all that. But I remember he coming back and he was informing us, and some of these fragments, which I have gone to those areas and talked to my people myself, they said that we don't want to take Roman because that is the language that other tribes are doing it in Nagaland, which are associated with a lot of other kinds of movements. And lots of them are guided by missionaries and things. So we are not that kind of a religious people. We are not that kind of a cultural people. So the choice of Roman will not symbolize our struggle too well. And certainly we are not going to take Assamese by any chance, because our first start of our struggle for identity is against Assamese. Just as the Kokboroks are doing it against Bengali, right, in Tripura, their struggle, which is drawing on that. So that issue of the, and then they chose Devanagari, saying we want to send a message that we are not secessionist movement people. We don't mind creating a feeling that we would like to link with the mainstream. So we will modify that. We are taking Devanagari to set aside Assamese, to set aside Roman, and to situate ourselves as different from the Assamese people and from the other tribes and all those things. And lots of interesting messages goes on to that. Yet, I think we need to go back and work and write these cases, what is happening into this. I have myself gone only on one visit to those schools and seen that. And the overall situation of education in that school was so saddening that one could not rejoice in the fact that they knew how to read and write their language. They knew how to read and write Bodo. But the other thing, they were lagging behind in so many subjects. Their maths was weak, their English was weak, their understanding of other subjects was weak. So there were far more important issues in education, of which language was only one component to draw upon. So the issues that are there plaguing Northeast those need to be tackled. But we must draw strength from the Northeast. For instance, in Nagaland, all the languages had literature committees. And some of the most senior officers in the state would be members of it. Even the chief secretary, for example, would be a member of the literature society and all that. That, I think, is an extremely important thing for the rest of this country to draw upon. Wherever we want to work on scripts and languages and people and put this, the fact that the people themselves have come together and created their own literature committees and are taking actions in building materials and putting things, I think that's a huge lesson. I don't think literature committees have come up in Arunachal Pradesh. I don't know how many literature committees are there in other states regarding other languages. So even in Assam, the other cases of the missings and the Tivas and all that, yeah, I have 5 minutes to wind up. So I'm just saying that the issues that we have to engage with as language planners must be rethought. Okay, so now, since I have only 5 minutes, I'll try, and I think I have, Northeast is such an engaging area. We will have to address. On the issue of coming, that the planners invest in is about what is called as creating a sense of belongingness with India, right? In the Northeast. Now, here I'm reminded of Fishman's two terms, nationalism and nationism. Nationalism was something you do, state activities, say building banks, universities, trains, and all kinds of institutional apparatuses in which you plow in money and put up a spread, the building of roads, institutions, everything. All that is happening and that is growing. So that has grown in the Northeast and created a sense of connectedness with the nation state in that sense. But nationalism, that stems from the heart. A sense of feeling of I belong to this mainstream and I am that. That has not yet borne full fruit. And so the planners are thinking of that. And to my mind, That will happen only when democracy takes deeper, you deepen your roots and you allow the people themselves to become equal stakeholders. They are the ones who must write the share of their destiny. So on even the language stories, the language planning about what kind of a states we want, what kind of a language medium schools we want, which schools should be, which languages should be taught, what kinds of script choices we make, all that must happen from below. So planning is an activity not to be initiated from the top, but something that has to happen from below, by the people, with the people, and yet people will learn because Northeast, they remain a vibrant thing. They come together and there's a sense of sharedness. The solutions that are being created in one area may be listened to. They may not directly be applied in their own settings, but they can listen to alternate ways what has happened in. So if our people in Arunachal can listen to what happened in Tripura, what's happened in this thing. I was talking yesterday to somebody in the head of the department of Kokborok in the university, and he was telling me about the tussle between the Bengali script and the Roman script. That is, the struggle is kept alive. I think they don't want to settle the issue because the issue of identity will then be sort of set aside. There, though the state is supportive of Bengali script, the people themselves have become, biscriptal. And in the university level, not even one person writes in Bengali script. Everybody writes in Roman script for the exams, though the choice is given. But the people's choice has consolidated and they have come together over the choice of Roman. Linguistically, the Boro people and the Kokborok people are quite akin to each other, but they have taken different stands in their own context and all that. The common thing is that both have rejected the state script. Bodos have rejected the Assamese and the Kokboroks are rejecting the Bengali script, and they are trying their own solutions. So, okay, let me therefore wish you all well. I am just saying that your idea of doing language policy and planning in the Northeast is about doing duty to your own service, become involved in the study of the description of your languages. Description itself is a first step towards the development of language. It adds to the way you talk about language. So linguists become party to the discourse on the development of language. They lend themselves towards so people begin to understand their language and they develop the language to talk about their language. So linguists help themselves. So your work of description and documentation must go, but the idea of development of language or giving it a foothold into educational domains and institutional support, all that must be taken up. And other issues that are there about official language and other things, many of them are already sort of settled issues, but yet you need to pick up. So you need to see which are the languages which are left behind, which are not yet able to get into the schools, and how can we lend ourselves towards strengthening their presence in schools. So let's pray and work towards a new pedagogy that questions the existing elite hold on English medium schools and brings in a pedagogy that allows an ecology of multilingualism where children's utterances find place and utterances are as valued as texts. They are there and we can develop our scripts and orthography over time, but give them an opportunity to write those languages in the scripts that they know. Don't empower yourselves to become decision makers on your own. Even linguists, we must resist in declaring languages as separate. This is adequate. This is not thing. Work with the people and work with them. Gradually, things will happen. Don't expect this thing. And to my mind, the idea of endangered languages that we have yes, it's important. It is making us pay attention to that. But it can be addressed by the people taking management of their own affairs with the help of state and through resource allocation. A very critical question on economics of education, the resources that are made available for that remains unanswered and something that we will talk about on some other time. Because of the paucity of time, all I can say is I'm grateful that I've got a chance to say a few things. And I've had the privilege of teaching there for 15 years in the Northeast and remaining engaged with my NELT program for 10 more years when I was in the institution. I think Northeast can help much of India how to engage with tribals, how to work with people who are empowered, because the tribes are empowered in Northeast, unlike their tribal brothers across many other states. So the lessons of Northeast are not meant only for Northeast, but one that will nurture a greater respect for diversity in the country as a whole. And I think our whole curriculum of language, of our curriculum of social sciences, will need gradually shift towards paying more attention and getting to know the Northeast better and all that. But for that, the Northeast must know itself better and guide us in putting things together. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity, and may you all do great work in the fields there.
Thank you very much, sir, for that enriching talk, especially drawing from your vast experience in Northeast states. I think we have some time for one or two questions, if there are any questions. Yeah, Professor Yashwanta is here. He wants to ask a question.
Yeah, Professor Yashwanta, nice, my friend from Manipur. Yes.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah, good morning, Yashwant. How are you?
You seems not changed much in your face as well as in your temperament of speaking. And you talk about language planning. So my question here is that what's the relation between the language planning and the new education policy 2020?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important. I'm just finishing an article on this subject. I'm writing in the next 10 days. I'll be submitting an article. It's called Design Thinking for Multilingual Education, right? Because the new education policy is supportive of multilingualism. It wants to draw on mother tongues, but we need new design thinking in some sense in which stakeholders contribute towards building new materials, new approach towards that. We can't, and the question that I'm asking is a monolingual, the idea of English medium schools or just mother tongue medium schools, say Kannada medium schools or Marathi medium schools, is that a valid way of approaching in a multilingual society where you admit that you need more than one language? So I am saying the idea, and to my mind, the nature of languages, it is a medium alone. The whole idea of saying it is a subject is in a way reducing it to its, downsizing it. The nature of language is to be a medium of communication. How will you draw upon that? So I'm saying the new education policy gives us an opportunity to plan, to become part holders, become stakeholders in language teaching, in language material production, in language training of the people involved there, in terms of testing and evaluation that will go on in those areas. And to remember that old Buller Committee report in England, that languages are across the curriculum, that all subjects draw upon the presence of different languages. So when we teach different languages, subjects, we are equally involved in promoting registers and building language capacities across. So the teaching of mathematics or the teaching of science or environment or everything, all of that is drawing on language. So as linguists, we must make sure that our languages become partners in the growth of those, of our understanding of subjects. And it's an opportunity for our languages to grow together. So the new education policy is giving us this, opening new possibilities. But those possibilities have to be worked out through planning and this thing. The overall vision of the society in terms of the constitutional vision is great. It is supportive of egalitarianism. It is a supportive of fighting. But we know inequality obtains. We know discrimination is there. So we have to thereby engage for the fight for social justice and quality education. And we must see in what way is language a contributing factor. I don't think all these problems that can be solved through language alone. There are much more issues of structure and other things involved in that. So, but yes, as language planners, we must become stakeholders in the new education policy and lend ourselves towards what happens in different states. And the communities must play the leadership role from below. Anybody else?
Thank you. Any more questions?
Anybody else has a question?
Yeah, so if there are no more questions, I think I will say thank you to our professor for that enriching talk. And yeah, if especially students, if you want to get in touch with sir, I think it would be much willing.
That, and I would want you all to pick up case studies. I would like to have case studies from Arunachal Pradesh. I know many linguists are now working and building up the discourses on language studies there. They may also want to lend their knowledge and their expertise into developing enriched pedagogy and enriching. I think in some sense we have to drop the idea of nationalism. It's the stake of human. We should not think that I am an American or a Britisher or an Indian or a Naga. I think we must become stakeholders because it's our collective stake. I think. So we must lend our expertise towards building that thing without being seen as interfering. I don't think honesty is what is required in this thing. We must do that. So give me case studies from different areas, and we would like to bring work together. Yeah, Tensu.
Thank you very much, sir. Let's give a round of applause, sir. And
yeah. Okay, Tensu, I want you to write about the Ao case, including the Mungsen and the Chanki varieties and the idea of variety in language and how we enrich pedagogy, which will give a chance for the Mungsen and Chanki to become part of the text of Ao and not be only situated in Chungli.
Thank you. We'll do that.
Okay, do that. Yeah, okay, Tensu. God bless you. So thank you so much, and we'll have. So may I leave
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir. We will
okay, Mona Lisa, God bless you all. Do well. I wish you all the very best in this conference. I wish I was there personally, embracing some of you and shaking hands with the others and enjoying the laughter of you people together. Okay, God bless you all. Take care.